Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII is a game that's been driving me a little crazy over the last few weeks. Back when I first played it sometime last year, I fell in love with what it set out to do. A third-person shooter set in the universe of Final Fantasy VII that deepens the lore and world building of the original title, and was something that hit me good at the time I played it. And since we are now living in a post-Final Fantasy VII Remake world, it makes Dirge an even more interesting title to go back and experience. If you take a look at the stories of Final Fantasy VII, most of them directly tie into Cloud, Jenova, and Sephiroth. Advent Children is this fucking box art, mostly about cleaning up the leftovers of Jenova and Sephiroth, and Denzel. I guess he's involved somehow too. And Crisis Core is a story that's whole purpose is to set up the original game. For the most part, we don't have stories in the FF7 world that tell a closer story without Cloud, Zack, or Sephiroth involved, and that have fewer stakes outside of Before Crisis and Dirge of Cerberus, mostly. See, Dirge of Cerberus starts off with an exciting proposition. A game starring Vincent Valentine in the lead role, a character that some players may never have even seen in their playthrough of Final Fantasy VII, and since he's an optional party member, you don't get to know too much about him outside of the basics. We know that Vincent used to be a member of the Turks and that he's in love with a lady in a cave, and that's about it. Apart from that and Vincent's connection with Lucrezia, who is Sephiroth's mother, we really don't get to know much about him other than the fact that he's cool as hell. So giving him his own game is honestly a pretty genius idea. And for the most part, this is a much smaller scale story that focuses on Vincent, showing us what his day-to-day life consists of, which is shooting. A lot of things. Of course, the adventure eventually bubbles over to a conclusion that involves Vincent saving the world by killing God. But let's just not talk about that bit, because it kind of goes against what I just said, and I can't be bothered to rewrite the beginning of the script. For about 60% of the game, this is a small-scale story about Vincent trying to uncover his past and thwart a new Shinra unit called Deep Ground. You will never guess where their base is located. Dirge of Cerberus specifically takes place 3 years after the original FF7, as Vincent struggles to make peace with his past and understand the parting words of the love of his life, I think. Anyway, I can't really tell, actually, so sorry if I misunderstood what their relationship is. This game makes it feel kind of weird. Anyway, Lucrezia says to him in her spooky little cave you can find in FF7 a lot of vague things. This scene gives us some basic backstory for Vincent too, showing us what ultimately led him to becoming a hot emo vampire sleeping in a coffin for a while. Even with this little bit of backstory, Vincent still feels like a pretty mysterious character in FF7 due to his quiet demeanor and the fact that everything happened to him so long ago. Hojo, his technical creator, doesn't care about him at all at this point, even though the man turned him into his own personal little goth gremlin. And the only reason Vincent joins the party at all is because they're after Sephiroth. Add in the fact that Lucrezia is the biological mother of Sephiroth, and we've got a vague and strange backstory to these characters that would probably do well as a game all on its own, right? So, Dirge of Cerberus has 3 main goals to achieve. First, it needs to expand on Vincent as a character and explain his weird abilities. Second, show us how FF7's cast has evolved since the ending of that game, and show us what the state of the world currently is. And finally, it needs to add some more meaningful depth to the original story and earn its place within the series. It does succeed in doing all 3 of these things, and I don't really think that can be argued. However, the game is doo-doo. Or at least that's what the majority of people on the internet seem to agree with. If you go onto nearly any forum for Dirge of Cerberus, you're likely to see people say that it ruins FF7. It's complete garbage. Or, this game broke into my house and stole all of my Kingdom Hearts 3 Funko Pops. Please, someone take them. I hate these things. I don't know, I regret buying them. In fairness, this game also has its fair share of defenders, of which I used to be its shining knight. I don't know what it is, but whenever I see that a game has more haters than gooders, I tend to want to like the game to spite people. But with Dirge of Cerberus, I was honestly blown away by how fun it was, how different it felt to anything else in the compilation of FF7, and most of all, I was in awe with this game's gun customization. I walked away from the game feeling pretty damn happy about the experience I had, so I decided to leave it a year and return for another playthrough when I was ready to re-experience it all again. But something has changed. I don't think I like this game much anymore. Unfortunately, I think I've started to see a few of the problems that other people tend to have with this game. But don't worry guys, I'm not entirely defecting to the other team just yet. I'm doing the smart and sensible thing by standing somewhere in the middle so that my opinion has no real value to anyone. But I'd still like to try and voice some of my problems with Dirge of Cerberus now, and who knows, maybe in another year's time, I'll have another revelation with the game, perhaps going in the complete other direction once again. Maybe we'll check in. Let's see. Now, since Dirge of Cerberus is a third-person shooter, there's only one thing the game has to get right in order to get a basic pass. Now, this could perhaps be a little controversial, what I'm about to say, but I think the basic shooting controls in Dirge are pretty damn good for what it's worth. The game auto-locks onto targets that are in the vicinity of your reticle, and it stays locked on until either the enemy is dead or you move the camera to another enemy. The stickiness of the lock-on lets you move around a fair bit without the target lock breaking, so you can run, dodge, jump, and move quickly to evade fire while still being able to get some accurate shots off here and there. This, in basic terms, makes a lot of sense since we can see Vincent being an extremely agile character in both Advent Children and this game's cutscenes. But things are far from perfect, to say the least. Before I start being too harsh, I have to say that most third-person shooters in the 6th gen era were not very good. And though there are standouts here and there, we were still a few years out from having standardized third-person control schemes and game feels. Which is also a blessing, since that gave us some pretty cool gems and diamonds in the rough. But whenever there's a solid template to borrow from, it can make everyone's lives a little easier. So it's a bit of a miracle that Dirge does feel as good as it does. But I don't think the game gets across the way Vincent should feel in combat at all. Vinny can do barely any of the cool trick shots you see in the CG cutscenes, so while shootouts can look like this in the movies, in practice they look more like this. This is a gigantic problem because it makes Vincent feel so boring to use most of the time. I'm not dodging bullets, lining up cool shots while flipping through the air or navigating the area and putting Vinny's agility to the test. No, I'm actually just walking through the same corridor multiple times, more than once in the game, and lazily shooting enemies while soaking up all the damage and trying not to fall asleep. Or cry. And why the hell are there so many jukeboxes in all the levels? It's boring at best, and at worst, it's downright painful to walk into encounters like this. Shootouts feel so brain dead that most deaths in this game will be caused by you not paying attention to the health bar when you're low. That's because there are no beeps to let you know you're low, or any other indication like that at all. You just have to keep checking up there every now and then, which is asking a lot when I'm trying to watch a Twitch stream while playing through the game. If I had to envision what Dirge of Cerberus should have controlled like, I'm thinking of something between Max Payne and Vanquish. Take the close quarters combat in tight environments of Max Payne and mix it up with the crazy bombastic bullshit of Sam Gideon, and I think we've got a pretty damn great game right there. See, for me, most of Dirge's gameplay problems are that you don't feel like a cool emo vampire with a tri-barrel revolver who is severely depressed. You instead feel like a generic third-person shooter man that could literally be in any other game. That core friction is what I struggle to overcome now, and that's not a limitation of the times. Do not throw that my way. Not when we had Kingdom Hearts 2 release a month beforehand and give us one of the best action games ever made. That game made the battles and CG cutscenes a reality in the gameplay, and Dirge of Cerberus needed to do the same to elicit any kind of giddy response from me. Where the rest of the gameplay is concerned, Dirge of Cerberus manages to be one of the hardest games to describe in any real detail, which is mostly due to how little there is to the game. Every stage just needs you to get from point A to point B, and most of the time, you don't even really need to defeat the enemies on the way. Each level also has side objectives that will pop up if you run into them. These can tell you to defeat a certain number of enemies in an area, or maybe help defend some allies. But these side missions come up in a way that feels more like a disturbance to the mission rather than a cool little side thing I want to complete. I'll just be walking down a hallway minding my own business, and a side mission will bust through a door and try to ram its objectives down my throat. Of course, these are always optional and only contribute to getting a better ranking at the end of the mission, and I assume getting some extra gil or XP. Now, if the basic gameplay was engaging, I'd be far more inclined to engage with some of this stuff. But none of it is. I think a lot of it also comes down to how little choice you have in these missions. Remember when I said that Vinny has a double jump? Well, you might think that you could use it to scale the environment to a degree, but you'd be wrong. Almost every single meter-high box, low wall, and railing has an invisible wall that stops you from doing anything you want to do. The game actively restricts you from exploring any of these environments on your terms. There's barely anything to find outside of the natural flow of the game anyway. Some shootable collectibles here and there, and a few reports that tie into the main story too, but being able to actually navigate the areas and utilize Vince's mobility to find some neat things would have helped make each level feel so much more varied and interesting. Instead, you just push forward, shooting enemies if you feel like it, but again, you really don't have to if you want. Sure, you'll get less XP and gil for doing that, but who cares? You're running past everyone anyway, and all of the boss fights are bad. It also needs to be said how rancidly dry the game's atmosphere is. Sometimes Dirge of Cerberus evokes a melancholic, somber tone that fits perfectly with Vincent's character, but it's extremely easy to turn that dial a little too far in that direction and make a game that feels very sleepy. Cutscenes are so slow because of this, due to Vincent not saying much or shots lingering on characters for way too long while nothing really happens. This weirdly becomes less of a problem during the game's final few missions, but where was this kind of pacing the other 90% of the time? It really does come across like Dirge of Cerberus is annoyed that you're playing it half the time, and it's choosing to be this way to spite you. And that really hurts to say, because I genuinely do love the idea of the vibe they're going for here, but cutscenes needed a re-edit. Yuffie needed way more screen time, and it would have helped a lot if this game had like a codec or something. Let me call Reeve only to be jump scared by a talking cat every now and then, please. But the thing that hurts the most of all in this game is gun customization. On the surface, the game's weapon customization is incredible. You get a few barrels, accessories, and base weapon types to work with, and you can make very distinct weapons that each fit into one of your 3 weapon slots. But this system falls apart as soon as you realize that the best gun in the game is the one you start with. I slap a long barrel on it because it looks badass, but this is really all you need. The Hydra and Griffin both offer long range and automatic fire respectively, but they lack the sheer all-around power of the Cerberus. There's simply no need to use other weapons outside of aesthetic purposes, and if you do decide to focus on the Cerberus, you can just pump all of your money into its upgrades and never have to think deeply about combat ever again, which you already didn't have to in the first place. This is such a big problem for me because this customization is like a dream, and there aren't many third-person action RPGs that let you turn a revolver into a Relonga. But this whole video still doesn't quite sum up how I feel, because even as I'm writing this, I can't quite bring myself to dislike this game too much. I still love what it tries to do, and considering it's a game about one of my favorite FF7 characters, I am a little biased. I still have things that I enjoy in this game. I like the story, and some of the new characters introduced here are really interesting. Shulk in particular brings a different kind of vibe to FF7's cast as a little girl that's had most of her childhood ripped away from her as a part of Deep Ground's experiments. And the way she slowly warms up to Vincent is really cool to see, especially when Vincent hasn't really had any close relationships with any characters other than Lucrezia in the story. He doesn't really have any friends. I also love the ambience of some of the missions. In particular, the Silent Edge level is beautifully creepy and moody with its soundtrack and the bleak visuals conveying a lot. Vincent also looks incredible from a visual standpoint. His crimson cloak strikes against the environment beautifully and contrasts well with this bleaker interpretation of FF7's world. And I love the attempt at making a game that feels slower paced and more introspective. It really does suit Vincent well, and I'm so glad that we have scenes of him simply thinking about his life or interacting with FF7's cast with dry sarcasm and straightforward wit. Steve Blum is incredible in this role, by the way, and I'm sad he won't be giving us any more with Vincent going forward because he really is the perfect casting choice as this character. I still wish this game had much better pacing, more interesting design elements, and gameplay that properly represented Vincent Valentine's abilities, but that isn't what's here. Dirge of Cerberus is a mess that still manages to worm its way into my heart somehow, and hopefully on a different day, I'll be able to look at it with a little more fondness. But hey, if Square Enix wants to take a crack at remaking this game next, I honestly feel like it could be incredible, if they manage to improve on all of its flaws anyway. Something that Crisis Core Reunion almost achieved, but